Today, you are going to get a front row seat to the memorable Springbok career of the legendary Joel Stransky. Joel, welcome to Front Row Rugby.
Peter, how's it? It's nice to be on the cast. Thanks very much for having me.
Great to have you here as well. Now, before we begin the conversation, let's take a look at the trivia question. In 2017, the Springboks played France 4 times. How many of those tests did the Boks win? Now, if you know the answer to the question, you can put it in the comment section down below, and we'll also find out if Joel knows the answer to that question, but we'll do that at the end of our conversation. Joel, I'd like to begin in 1993. We're playing against the Wallabies in Sydney. It's a memorable victory over the world champions. How do you remember that night?
Well, I'm assuming you're talking about the first test, and it was my test debut. So I remember the tour really well. It was a wonderful tour. It was great to be traveling with the Springboks for the first time. Great to be on a proper 6-week, 7-week long tour. Not easy, because it was the sort of end of the beginning of the second Springbok era and the end of this real provincialism. So players from all provinces trying to get to know each other, trying to become part of a joint team with an aligned goal. And not always easy. There was definitely a bit of provincialism, and the guys tended to stick with their teammates from their provinces. But it was a real learning curve, and that first test match was fantastic. In fact we could have won the second as well. We had the sending off, and the third we were really close. But the first one was a really special evening. Not much was expected of us. So when you're the underdog and you come through on top, it's always a great bonus. But if there's one thing that galvanizes and brings people together, it's hard work and reward, and we certainly got the reward that night.
Hey, if you're enjoying this video, why not hit the like button?
And probably not in the second and third test matches, as you mentioned. I've had a couple of ex-Boks on the show who have told me about that second and third test, where they felt that the Aussies knew what we were going to do, and they were probably just a little bit too street smart for us. Would you go along with that?
Well, I think that's the Australian way, isn't it? I mean, you can go back in history, almost every series where they've been outstanding, they've been street smart. They don't always have the biggest players. They don't always have, the best scrum. They certainly, in fact, I'd guess physically they're probably on the back foot a lot of the time. But they are incredibly street smart in the way they go about things. They're very clever in the way they go about it. I'm not sure that we South Africans, the Springboks, we are quite predictable. I think that's the nature of the way we play the game. We're big and physical. We rely heavily on the scrum and the set phase, the maul, the physicality of the game. So I don't think we come along with something new, but I don't think that's what cost us the series down in Australia. I think we were naive in some ways. We were all inexperienced. We didn't have players with a lot of experience. And having said that, we could have won that second test in Brisbane. James was a little unlucky to be sent off for a bit of dissent, and nothing really unexpected when you think of the bad boy of world rugby, and we miss him terribly. But if he were sitting here, he knows that he may have let us down a bit on the day, but we still had opportunities. We still could have gone on and won that game. And I think even the third test, the night test back in Sydney, we had chances to win that, and we didn't manage to really take advantage. So I'm not sure that street smart's what got the better of us. I think in many ways, when I look back, I think our naivety got the better of us on those 2 tests.
You mentioned that Australia was an enjoyable tour. After that, it was off to Argentina. Again, I've had a couple of ex-Boks on the show who have told me that Argentina was wonderful. They usually reference the meat and the pretty girls. What do you say?
Well, I think the meat there is sensational, and the girls are pretty. There's no doubt about it. But it was the end of a long year. It was, I think, having lost that series in Australia, it was probably an opportunity at the end of the long year just to go and come together again and come away with a couple of good wins, and we did. But it probably, for me, it wasn't one of the great tours to be on. There was maybe I wouldn't say there was a lot happening. It was just probably the timing was off, and we were tired, and It was memorable, and there were lots of, when I think back on some of the funny moments that happened off the field, there were some really funny moments. But I'm not always. I don't look back on the rugby on that tour with great memories. And I know I didn't play particularly well, but it wasn't one of those tours where you look back and you think, sure, but it was a wonderful tour. There was the Battle of Tucumán and the massive fight, the brawl, the crowds. It was like in its own way, it was quite a difficult tour.
Speaking of difficulties, you were actually out of the side then for about a year before you got back in. How difficult was that period for you?
Well, it's always difficult when you dropped, and I missed the tour to New Zealand, which is what you're referring to, and that was in 1994. And that was bitterly disappointing. For all the excuses the selectors and the coaches have given me post the tour, and to say that it was it was nothing to do with them. It was probably the most disappointing moment in my whole life. To have an opportunity to tour New Zealand and to not go on the tour was terrible. So it was tough. But there's only one thing you can do. You knuckle down and you go back and you play your provincial and your club rugby, and you try to prove them wrong. And you keep working hard, and you set new goals, and hopefully you come back the next year a little bit stronger and a whole lot better.
And you were back in the side against Argentina, scoring 22 points, I think it was, in that first test in Port Elizabeth. Still a Springbok record at the time. Did Kitch Christie have any conversations with you during that period about being the first choice fly half for the World Cup?
No, not at all. And I think when Kitch became the coach, I think we were all a little bit unsure of what his thinking was and what his game plan was and which players he liked. We knew that obviously he would select predominantly from his Transvaal side, who he had tremendous loyalty to, and and they had the same loyalty to him. And I guess when you've achieved so much with that provincial side, you have faith in those players, and you tend to go back and select them. So for the rest of us, we knew it was going to be tough to get into that side, into that squad, and become part of the thought process and the thinking. But he was a coach who always kept his cards quite close to his chest. He always he had a clear distinction in terms of how you addressed him and dealt with him. He was always the coach. He was never one of the boys. It was it was a little bit different, and for I think for all of us who hadn't worked with him before, it took a little bit of getting used to.
And what was your relationship like with him?
So I think in the beginning it was a little cordial. I remember one of the first early training sessions, I called him Kitch, and he stopped me right there and he said, "I'm either coach or I'm Mr. Christie to you." So there was a and I just tried to ask him a question. So, oh God, how tough is this going to be if I want to call him Mr. Christie? But then you sort of pick up the bits from the Gauteng players and how they dealt with him, and they all called him coach, and you start calling him coach, and you get on with it. There's no doubt as well, though, that you soon realize he was unbelievably rugby knowledgeable, a great thinker of the game, real deep thinker of the game, attention to detail, and there was a lot that you grew to really respect and like about him, and I guess even more so when you become part of his starting lineup and his inner workings.
It's funny that you mentioned the coach and Mr. Christie story, because Mark Andrews told me a very similar thing, and I'll put a link up to that interview just here for you if you want to go and watch that. So Joel, I know that the boys went through quite a vigorous training regime in the lead up to the World Cup. Tell me a bit about that.
It was nothing vigorous. It was torture. It was just straight torture. It was rugby players being trained and battered into submission. It was a pain and suffering. And again, one evening at the Wanderers, at the end of a long day of fitness and hard work, I actually said to Coach Christie, I said, surely we should spend more time on skill levels and game plan and strategy, because that's what's going to win the World Cup. And he said to me, "No, my boy, the fittest team will win the World Cup." And how right he was, and I think it was again one of those lessons you learn that in anything, whatever you do, you have to have a strong foundation. And in rugby, the foundation is your fitness. And we were the fittest team at the Rugby World Cup. When it went to extra time in the final, we were unfazed. We weren't tired yet. We were at that place where we could go again and go longer and go harder, and knew mentally that we had the ability to go longer and harder than anyone else. So he was right, but in the months build up, we did a lot of fitness. We had Ray Mort come and do a lot of that training of us. He was tough. He was hard, and I think also what that fitness and that training does, that going through hardship together, as much as it lays that real strong foundation that you build everything else on top of, it brings you together, and it certainly forms a proper team, a proper unity within that camp. And for us, it did all of the above. We became a tight-knit bunch. We were no longer players from the Lions and the Stormers and the Sharks, whatever it was. We were the Springbok squad, and we stood together, we trained together, and we went through hell together. And as a result, we got those results together.
Okay, it's time for the Rugby World Cup. What is the 25th of May 1995? We're playing Australia. It's at Newlands. We beat them 27-18. You scored 22 of those points. How memorable was that day for you?
Well, it was enormous, So and it was enormous for a number of reasons for all of us. So in the build-up to the Rugby World Cup, Kitch Christie said to us, he said, "There's two roads you have here for Rugby World Cup. You have the high road and the low road. The low road is a tough road. If you lose to Australia, you will play a quarterfinal against a tough side." I can't remember who it was. It would have been England. England in the quarters. You would have had a tough semi-final, and then you would have had to, this huge final again. Almost impossible to win those games. But if you beat Australia in the opening game, you get the easier quarterfinal. We got Samoa. You get France rather than one of the really tough Southern Hemisphere sides, and then obviously you've got to win the final. But he said it's the low road and the high road, and that became our goal. We trained then for the next 3 or 4 months to play against Australia that day, to beat Australia on that day. So to come together, at the ground or in the bus and head on down to Newlands for the game was just sensational. To see this cosmopolitan crowd, this fully supportive crowd out in the streets. I think it was on a Tuesday afternoon, dressed in their Springbok kit with the new South African flag, real unity behind a sports team. It was just the most sensational day. And then to go out and play as well as we did. And I often describe it, if I do talks, I describe it as saying, it's like anything else. It's about focus. If you are focused on defending the whole World Cup, and you're playing against a team who are focused only on beating you, that team that are focused on one element are probably going to beat you, because their focus is a real focus. It's not a broad generic focus. And I think Australia made the mistake of, I wouldn't say they underestimated us, but they certainly had a focus on trying to defend the World Cup, where our focus was purely to beat them, and we beat them on the day. But we played superbly. We had there are moments from that game that were just, in my mind, sensational. And obviously there was the try, but there were little moments. James Small telling me to kick the drop goal, and then putting his arm around me because I'd listened to him. And there were like little things in the game. Peter Hendricks' try, going around the great David Campese, little things that will live with us forever. It was a spectacular day, brilliant day.
And just as you mentioned that, the goosebumps return, it really was a wonderful, wonderful occasion. Joel, when I was doing my research for this interview, I had completely forgotten that you didn't actually play in the quarterfinal against Western Samoa. Why was that?
So we had that battle of Boet Erasmus against Canada in our last pool game. And I got whacked in the eye in that game and had some stitches above my eye, and actually had a small cut on the eyeball, just below the retina, but on the actual eye. So I wore a patch for 5 or 6 days, and maybe even a whole week. Actually, I had a patch and couldn't even look into the light for a little while. So there's no way that I could play with one eye. So I missed the game with the injury, but fortunately it healed up quickly. And the next week against France, we were back in action.
Speaking of the next week against France, those conditions in Durban, does it get any worse than that?
No, it can't. It was torrential flooding. But then again, you look at it, and I remember this. Dan Retief often chats to me about it. I spoke to him before kickoff while we were waiting, and he said to me, "How come you managed to stay so calm?" And the thing is, in that environment, you must worry about what you can worry about. if something's out of your hands and out of your control, it's pointless spending time stressing about it. And for us, that's what it was. The conditions were the same for both sides. I don't even think the French had ever played in conditions as wet as that before, with so much water lying around. We were just lucky the game went ahead, and I think once it did go ahead, it was tough. It wasn't just wet; it was windy. The kicking conditions were tough, tough handling conditions. It didn't suit either team, and we snuck through. We were under enormous pressure at the end. Abdul Benazir almost crossed the line. James Small managed to stop him somehow. I'm still not sure how he didn't slide over at that point. But you take your bit of luck and you ride your luck when you can, and you make use of every little bit of advantage you can.
Absolutely. So the next week, it's the Rugby World Cup final against the All Blacks. I've watched the match back quite a few times. I think they only broke through a first-time tackle twice in the entire match. And it's my opinion that we actually looked quite comfortable for the full duration, and that the fact that it went to extra time actually flatters them. Would you agree with that?
Sure. So I've never watched the whole game. So I couldn't tell you how many clear breaks there were. I think if I think about it, those two clear breaks were probably both John Olomo, actually. One, I think, was down the far side, and one was near a scrum up the middle somewhere. I think Mark Andrews made the tackle once, and maybe Joost the other time. Look, they were a great side, and I think it was a proper test match, a proper World Cup final that was always going to be close. It was always going to be quite defensive. It was always going to be about, creating a couple of small opportunities and managing to capitalize. And I think we did that. They maybe did it. And if I think back, Andrew Mertens had a drop goal in about the 75th minute that could have won it for them. And he pushed it to the right. And I was, the last guy trying to put pressure on him. And when I turned to see that it was missing, it was a huge relief, because I think we were, a few minutes to go in a tight defensive game like that. It would have been quite hard to go back on the other side and get some points. But the longer the game went on, the longer we got into, the deeper we got into extra time, the better we were and the more convincing we were. And maybe for that alone, we did deserve to win it. And also fate and destiny was on our side. We had the Madiba magic. We had Madiba's touch. We had a nation behind us for the first time ever. We had, our stars were aligned. There's no doubt about that.
It was very special. And speaking of special, the moment that you cemented your place in the hearts of all South Africans, talk us through that drop goal.
Well, it was it was 12 all. We had a scrum in a good position. I think it was around about the 22, just off to the right, and big blindside. And we had a couple of great blindside moves. We had a couple of moves we'd scored it. The one we called, actually, we'd scored against Australia with. And it's when you got the likes of Joost and Andre Joubert and James Small on the outside there, or I think James was still on the field at that point. And you've got, a guy like Rudolf Straley, you can pick up off the base and accelerate around the corner. You have a massive threat, and you can stretch defenses. And we'd stretch them and then throw in the inside pass, or we'd stretch them and then throw in the outside pass. And we call the move to go to the blind side. And they'd obviously studied our game, our moves, because as soon as the scrum was set, the way they stood up, they lined up to defense. It was clear as day. They knew what we were going to do, and they had all those bases covered. But what that does is it leaves space on the open side again. And so I called to Joost. I said, cancel, send the ball back this way. We've got to go this side. And it's not often you overrule Francois Pinot's call. So he looked at me a little bit surprised. And I said, and the noise and the crowd and the huge volume, it's quite hard to communicate. And we did a lot of it by hand signal. And he didn't. He cancelled the move and sent the ball back. And Kitch had me working on the drop goal, so I was hitting them sweet. So it was just a matter of making sure, no one charged it down. And fortunately, no one did.
And what does it feel like when the referee blows the final whistle and you're a rugby world champ?
So the thing with that is you celebrate, but you celebrate in that little tight tribe, in that little circle. And I think And I mean, the things I remember after the final whistle was high-fiving a friend of mine in the crowd and walking around the field a bit and seeing my wife and family. And but actually, I think only in time does the enormity of the occasion actually really set in, and you really understand and get a sense of what you've actually achieved, particularly in our environment in this country where it was so much more than just a rugby match. It was a critical time for us. It was a period of uncertainty, and it sort of was an opportunity used so brilliantly by Nelson Mandela to bring a country together. And I think only as you get older and a little bit more mature, and you get to understand a little bit more about life itself, you look back and you really understand the enormity of it. At the time, it was wonderful. We won the World Cup and we went out and celebrated. But I think as you get a little bit wiser, you realize just how really special it was.
So, Joel, the All Blacks were back in South Africa about a year later, and they recorded an historic series win. I know that you didn't play in all of those test matches, but what do you think went wrong?
So actually, I played in all of them. The last one, I came off the bench, so I actually did play in all of them. It was so I can tell you exactly what went wrong. Some people wouldn't like to hear what went wrong, but I can tell you exactly what went wrong. We had a new coach, Andre Markgraaff. He was the new broom that tried to do things very differently, that broke up the unity and broke up the team. It was the advent of professionalism. We were being paid, and there was drama around the boardroom stuff. It was a period of evolving rugby, particularly in our country, that came with its dramas, and it came with its problems, and most importantly, it came with a coach who cocked it up. To be quite frank, I don't think he did a great job. And if he was sitting here right now, I'd say it. I don't think he's too fond of me, but I mean, that's my view. And I think history shows. Maybe the results show for themselves. So we didn't play particularly well. We played against an All Black team that was unbelievably motivated and inspired and wanted to, do right the wrongs of the World Cup the year before, and wanted to be the first team to win a series on these shores. And if you think about it, what a really great side they were, how good they were, and the fact that we had, so many internal issues, it's not surprising we came unstuck a little bit. But it is right up there with those great elements of disappointment. To be part of the first team to lose a home series is particularly disappointing. And it was a tough time. I think it was a tough time in the evolution of South African rugby and the evolvement into fully professionalism.
So, Joel, you were mentioning there your opinion on Andre Markgraaff. What was your relationship like with him?
It wasn't good. It wasn't good. And, there were some things that I guess tested it, I think. But I wouldn't want to delve into the bad side of that. It wasn't good. Enough said.
Understood. How disappointing was it then for you that your Springbok career ended at that moment?
So I think it was disappointing. It was, and I mean, it became abundantly clear that I didn't fit into his plans, whether it was for for having an opinion or as a player, whatever it was. It didn't really matter. I didn't fit into his plans, and there wasn't probably mutual respect, which meant he probably couldn't pick me, to be fair, and because he didn't like or respect me, and he knew I had no time or respect for him. So I guess it made sense then to look for greener pastures or to move on and set new goals. So I had an opportunity to go play in the UK, and I grabbed it with both hands and headed over to play for the Leicester Tigers and to play the game I loved playing. It still is one of my great passions, the game of rugby union. To go and play in the UK was a great experience. It was great for us as a young family, and at the time, if you know you're not going to be part of the tests setup, then you go look for a new challenge, and it was a great new challenge and wonderful to go play for the Leicester Tigers. I must tell you, it's of all the clubs I played for, that is the one real city which is a rugby playing city, with a rugby culture, with a rugby way of life. And it was a real privilege to be part of that culture for 4 years.
I must tell you, I've got a friend who I've worked with in the past who is from that part of the world, and he always speaks very fondly of you whenever him and I are discussing rugby and the history and all that sort of stuff.
Good, because my time at Leicester was so special, and I made great friends. I played with some great players. We achieved some great things. It was, and I guess also the other side of that is when you've been through a year of off the field turmoil and evolution and part of a players committee and setting up, rugby politics, and then, the play on the field and the losing and all those dramas, to go there and to have nothing else to do but play the game you love playing with none of the sideshows. It was spectacular. It was a great time for us.
Joel, a question that my viewers love me to ask our guests: who was your toughest opponent?
Sure. So when I was young, growing up and as a youngster, Niles Poeta was my hero and my toughest opponent. To play against him and was always a great privilege and a great challenge. But I think when you grow up, you also realize that your opposite number is not always your number one opponent. There's other guys around who especially as a fly-off, you don't defend against your opposite number. You defend normally against the number 12 on the other team. So you end up making tackles on big heavy number 12s and guys who carry the ball. So if you think about that All Black side, I think it was Walter Little and Timmy Horan, and that Australian team was just sensational. But the guy who was always for me really tough to play against, just because he was so damn big and so damn skillful, was Zinzan Brook. He came with pace. We used to call him the baby rhinoceros because he had such a huge head and so came with so much pace. And then he kicked a drop goal in a World Cup from 40 meters out. I mean, he's a proper player across the board.
I remember that moment as well. Joel, you mentioned earlier about funny moments on the tour. Is there one that you can share with us?
So probably in that World Cup there were a couple, and maybe the one that is most amusing is that I think we played on the Tuesday afternoon. We played Australia. I think on the Friday we played Romania in our second pool game. I think I think it was Friday. And Rudolf Strauli's wife had given birth to their first child at some point during the week before the Australian game. And Rudolf and Kitch had asked us to please not go out and celebrate on the Tuesday night after the game. He said, we've got another game on Friday. Can we please stay in and stay calm and make sure we're ready for Friday? But Friday night after that game, we went out and we celebrated. And I think we ended up down in the waterfront in the harbour area. And it got quite late, and I think some of those fishing boats were coming back already, and Rudolf Strauly popped down to one of the boats and went and bought a snook that must have been like 1.5 meters long, one of these real rugged-looking game fish, beautiful eating and not the prettiest thing. They took it back to the hotel, and we hid it in my roommate's bed, Mark Andrews. We hid it in his bed and wrapped it up in the duvet and came back about 20 minutes later and climbed into bed with this fish. Oh, it was horrendous. He jumped out, mate. He probably made the biggest tackle of his whole career when he smashed me in my bed. But that fish lived with us in the hotel for about 3 days. We all had to contribute to about 10 sets of laundry to have all the laundry replaced. But it was great while the fish was getting passed around, and good fun at the time.
And what are you up to these days?
I have a share in a business. We've just sold a couple of our businesses, but we still have 7 businesses in our stable, mainly in and around the tech space, a couple of others. Keeps us busy, keeps us working. I live in Salt Rock. I'm working from my home office today. As I sit here, if I look out over my laptop, I look out to sea. It's a beautiful day. Travel up to Joburg most weeks. Life is pretty good. Life is pretty good for me.
That's great. Joel, we're going to take a look at that trivia question again quickly from earlier. In 2017, the Springboks played France 4 times. How many of those tests did the Boks win? Do you know the answer, Joel?
I don't know the answer, but I'm trying to work it out. I think so 2017 was before our resurgence, so it would have been a weak moment. I think we won only 1.
I tell you what, we actually won all 4 of them.
There was I let the fact that we were poor in 2017, 2018 cloud my judgment, but I couldn't remember us losing. I just thought we were so bad at the time, we must have lost a few.
Yeah, we actually beat them 3-0 at home in South Africa before the Rugby Championship, and then we beat them narrowly in Paris at the end of the year.
You did right, yeah.
Joel, let me say thank you very, very much for being available today. It was an absolute pleasure having you on Front Row Rugby, and I hope that we can have you on again in the future.
Peter, it was lovely chatting, man, and if you want me on in the future, I'm free, young and available.
Last time on Front Row Rugby, 2007 Rugby World Cup winner Andre Markgraaff was my guest. You can go and have a look at that video. It's appearing on your screen right now. Next time, we'll have 1992 Springbok coach John Williams with us. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, why not tackle the like button? You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any content from Front Row Rugby. See you next time.